throw to Theo Sakodjis, who I like the photo of his high school yearbook that's up on screen when you. Oh, there's the real Theo, the hairy version. You're muted, Theo, too. Theo's going to run a response panel with Lindy Dietz and Barney Glover and G Song. And then we're going to come back. Feel free to drop in, Minister, if they're starting to annoy you on the way through the response panel. Drop in, no problem. But I might hand over to Theo. Thanks, mate.
Thank you, Christopher. This is my COVID look. I have aged in 6 weeks and grown a beard accordingly. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your time, and our hearts and thoughts and minds are with you through everything you've been through and everything you keep driving for our community.
Thanks.
In spite of that, mate. So keep up the great work. Everyone, we have 3 great panelists. Jisong from Lend-Lease, a tremendous agent and champion of Western Sydney and a son of Western Sydney, as a company driving forward. Barney Glover, as previously introduced by Chris, a tremendous thought leader, and Lindy Dietz, who's driving the great city of Campbelltown onwards and upwards to take advantage of these opportunities. The dialogue set forward a really clear agenda around recovery, reform and re-engagement, and being the path forward on the back of COVID, and as we look to take forward of both the opportunities in Western Sydney and broadly the investment that's being made on the back of the government as well as private sector as they come in behind that. So really interested in, and as we frame around recovery, what are those picks we need to be making? Where are those opportunities? And where is that moment and those actions that we can really look to do something different? So in that regard, Barney, I'm going to throw to you to begin with. Captain's pick. You're not known for doing that. You're a much more measured and scientific man. You like the counsel of the people around you. But that aside, if you had one pick, one thing that you could do that you would be investing in or undertaking coming straight off the back of the COVID crisis to drive us into recovery, what would it be and what would generate the most impact for Western Sydney?
Thanks, Theo. And if I could also acknowledge the Minister, and while I might be disappointed about Rydalmere, Minister, you can't doubt this government and the investment you've made in infrastructure, and which will go on. And the metro's great, certainty is great. I think we look at a whole range of options around Rydalmere, and we'll continue to liaise with you and the department in relation to that. But congratulations on
Thanks, Barney.
Yet another important step forward and your own contribution to it, which is remarkable. Look, having said that, if I was to say one thing, connectivity to the airport is a crucial part of it. The Minister's just indicated what the options might be there. Obviously, we have a great interest around Werrington. To see that connection from St Mary's to the airport and to the southwest would be a crucial part of what I'd say that we should get on with. The airport, it's interesting, we're going to move into a different era around air travel because of COVID. It'll recover, but it might recover in different ways. And that might shape our airport I think it's still a vitally important part of 2026. Let's not delay anything, but I think we need to think through what air travel is going to look like. And I think this is an opportunity, because infrastructure stimulus is going to be so critical, that we think about that connectivity more than just the spine from St Mary's to the airport. But I would, and I know Lindy's here online, I'd be very much encouraging that connection through the southwest at the same time. And let's do it right. If we can get up to the northwest, that would connect in a vitally important, generationally significant way.
Lindy, throwing to you, I know you've been called at various times the queen of connectivity and trying to really get the southwest connected and taking advantage of things, but you're also not a one-trick pony. So what would be your captain's pick? What's that one thing that would drive the real growth on the back of COVID coming forward, but leave the best benefit for Campbelltown and the Macarthur region, but equally take advantage and opportunities for the Parkland City and Western Sydney more broadly? You're just on mute, Lindy.
Oh, okay, sorry. I couldn't find myself.
You're all good.
I'm the third on the hat trick for the unmuting button. Sorry, guys. Thank you, Theo, and hello, Minister, and thank you for your time today. Look, I think any infrastructure investment is critical to economic recovery, but particularly in the Western Parkland City, where there's already been infrastructure committed just not funded for delivery. The need has been determined, the benefits known, the financial investment is now what's required. So sensibly, I would bring forward the projects that government has already strategically planned and committed for in the Western Parkland City, that being the North-South Rail and the rapid bus connections to each of the metropolitan clusters in the Western City. The great economic divide between the West and the East, and the further investment in the Eastern and Central cities to the absence of the West will only exacerbate the delay in economic recovery for the Western Parkland City. So I just think it's a no-brainer from my perspective.
So, Jisong, I know that Lend-Lease has got significant experience when it comes to activating precincts and driving on the back of transport-orientated development. The announcements today of the EIS on East-West is obviously, as John Burton has talked about, a significant opportunity. From Lend-Lease's perspective, where do you see being the best play? And I'm really interested in your perspective between that investment in large major projects and whole lots of small projects, and how we activate at those two levels across the region.
Okay, thanks Theo, and thanks Minister for your time. Gratefully I think the Minister's made our captain's pick for us, because we genuinely think that Metro West is going to be game changing for the state, and that ability to link the economic engine room of the Sydney CBD with the Parramatta CBD by a modern automated rapid mass transport system that is going to have profound effects on the way the economic and focal point of the city is got all the state will move from the east to the west. And like John and Chris mentioned earlier with East London, we see great parallels, except that movement in London was from west to east. In the short term, there's an ability to employ thousands of white-collar professionals immediately in terms of their starting the design and planning of the infrastructure. And long term, there's going to be fundamental and profound benefits from an economic productivity perspective around how demographics are spread and how that affects the way we live, work and play. So from a precinct perspective, we're incredibly excited to ultimately have the opportunity to participate in the creation of precinct developments in Westmead, Parramatta and SOPA. But in terms of what we can control, we have strategic land holdings in Rozelle Bay. And off the back of COVID and off the back of the Metro West investment, our strategy is now to accelerate that development. So we feel like we can deliver thousands of homes, a large portion of social and affordable homes, before that Bay's precinct station is delivered. And we think that's going to support the business case for Metro West. And we think that will also aid to the day one activation of that precinct. And that value that we create, we want to try and share with the state to help stimulate the economy and create some social value. So we've got plans to help create a new bay run around Rozelle Bay, linking our vision with the vision for the fish markets as a viable alternative to the Drummoyne Bay run. And we also have a vision to try and restore and reactivate the old Glebe Island Bridge to create that economic relationship between the Bays precinct, Pyrmont and the Sydney CBD. In terms of your question around small projects and big projects, you know, we see the benefit of pursuing both typologies of projects. In terms of small projects, we find that any investment that we make provides a higher cost-benefit ratio in terms of economic stimulus and the promotion of secondary development. We find that the investment in our greenfield developments pushes cash deeper into the economy and our local supply chain benefits. From a large precinct perspective, we believe there's an amplifying effect and impact from our investment, and there's a scalability to those benefits, and the structural uplift that comes from those precinct developments has a broader impact and a broader benefit socially and economically to the wider
I'm interested
economy.
in picking up on that point with Lindy. Lindy, I've heard you speak recently about the trauma and the damage to small business and medium businesses in your region in particular. How important, because big projects take time, the Minister's talked about the lag times, making sure we make the investments right. how important are those small localized projects to start getting the activity in your town centres and starting to get those small businesses, sole traders active and operating in a position to take advantage of the major projects as they flow through downstream?
Theo, it's critical. Small to medium business is really, really suffering at the moment. We have lost 30% already of our small to medium business because of COVID-19. I think there is great opportunity for them to get involved. If I gave you some local examples, we've got some amazing local industry that can pivot really quickly in terms of their operations. We have an example of BresMed in Ingleburn, an Ingleburn company that's producing concepts and prototypes and iterations of valves for alternative ventilators, and that wasn't their core business pre-COVID. We've got big concrete factories. We've got all of those things that are actually going to stimulate the big major projects. So actually involving and engaging those small to medium businesses are essential, I think, to the life of our city.
So Barney, the Minister touched on it earlier when talking about stage 2 for light rail, but Lindy's just touched on it there about how businesses are pivoting and evolving. We've seen a lot of commentary from people almost starting to see, do we need a new sense of nationalising and bringing local business and prioritising Australia over other things, even at the expense of cost? To me, it seems like a tremendous opportunity to harness the brain power of the region, to not go back to the future, but to transform to a new future. What are your thoughts on how coming out of COVID and with major infrastructure and the business community that we've got around Western Sydney, how we can look to innovate and really drive to a new normal that's about a new way of doing business as opposed to just trying to re-engineer relics of the past?
Well, I think we're beginning to see the debate going on about Australia being as self-sufficient as it can be. COVID has stretched us in a lot of ways that we didn't anticipate, and rapidly. I know within the university we've had to transition nearly 1,200 units of study online in 2 weeks, and to do it well and to do it in a world-class context has been extraordinary. That's been the case in universities all around the country. So higher education is never going to be the same. Technology is going to influence the way in which we do business and the way we reach out and support businesses. One of the other really interesting things that's emerging as we Zoomify the world at the moment is we're engaging with each other like this, and I congratulate the Dialogue for the way in which Chris and the team are connecting people together in a way that overcomes some of the tyranny of traffic and distance. We need to address all of that post-COVID, but it's great to see we can still stay together. And we're going to learn from that and develop from it. I think Western Sydney's got a great opportunity as part of the rebuilding and reframing of our economy. Clearly, there's going to be some areas of focus that's coming around the Aerotropolis, for example. I mean, one of the crucial things to get right now is to bring some projects forward. The Aerotropolis is a crucial part around the airport's going to be critical to that and the way business will engage. GPOP is a really crucial part of it. We talked a moment ago, you said Parramatta to Sydney Olympic Park. I think Jay said that. I think it's Westmead to Sydney Olympic Park. And last year, the University of Sydney and Western Sydney University put forward our plan for bigger, better and sooner for that connectivity. Well, I think the imperative now is even stronger. The Metro decision today by the Minister gives us certainty around that and that project and how we activate it. As Jay just said, we can activate it in a variety of ways. What we want to do at Sydney Olympic Park to connect with small to medium-sized enterprises and startups and innovations, the way Launchpad is our business incubator hub is now taking off in Parramatta, taking off in Liverpool, will be great in Campbelltown and elsewhere. I think we have a really exciting set of precincts in the West that should become a major focus of what stimulates this recovery mode and then the changing nature of our economy.
So, Christopher, back to you. And a question that I think would be interesting to the Minister in that regard is, what needs to change from what we've been doing historically, whether it's in regulation or its approach or mindset, for us to truly unlock what we're doing forward and don't make the same mistakes? Over to you, mate.
I'll supplement that to Andrew with, as I said, a lot of our current thinking is is influenced by first our trip to West London last year, which was very instructive for a Western Sydney community, particularly about the role private sector can play as better partner with you in the urban renewal and the importance of transport as a social policy lever, not just economic. But then also for you here now, it's interesting about G from Lend-Lease and Lindy here, that partnership, Dick Dusseldorp, that basically developed, first it was John MacArthur, then it was Dick Dusseldorp that developed Campbelltown, developing MacArthur Station, Bradbury, sort of things with private money. Is one of those big reform agendas for you, despite running a Herculean public sector fund, you're running the best sort of Labor public works program the world's ever seen. Do you look for a time now to flick the switch back to a bigger role for the private sector and partnering you going forward in this ambitious infrastructure program?
Oh, I mean, look, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the construction side of things and the asset maintenance side of things, that's a given. But just listening to the panel, there's a couple of things that I think kept coming out in my own mind as I was listening. Firstly, population growth. As a transport minister who's grown the number of services on a weekly basis by in excess of 40,000, and the last 5 years it's been nuts. I mean, we've seen train patronage go from 300 million passenger trips to 420 million. Wow. I think there is a big debate that needs to be had about population growth. So because immigration levels are going to be drastically affected by COVID, what that does in terms of supply and demand across business is going to be a very big question for us all. Sadly, I think also we are going to see structural unemployment. So there'll be people in their mid-50s who potentially could never work again as a result of what's happened. And so we've got to put our minds to how we can meet that challenge, because the growth projections also underpin the infrastructure projects that we're seeking to deliver over the next 40 plus years. So I don't think there's any dispute in terms of the program. I think it'd be hard pressed to find a Liberal or Labor politician in Western Sydney who would be opposed to the direction, because I think business supports it, the university sector supports it, we all support it.
The West is prepared to pay to play.
To a point, I think, Chris, you got to be careful in saying that, because again, at the end of the day, how much private equity is there going to be really around to facilitate this? So, if we see the pause button on immigration, and Harry Triggerbroth will tell you, the confidence level in the Chinese to invest in the property market is something which, the reality is that has played a major impact in terms of the property market over the last 10 years. What we see in terms of foreign investment in that space is going to be an interesting observation. But if we are going to be more nationalistic in our approach, which, is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think globalisation has delivered some incredible outcomes, but at the same time, it's also delivered some incredible problems. We've seen that where, we become too dependent on China and, for our pharmaceuticals and PPE and everything else. And look what's happened around the world. It's been absolute growth. So, I think we've got to ask ourselves, well, okay, what is the shape of Australia in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? But how do we actually get to that pathway? So we all have this vision around Western Sydney, Aerotropolis being an incredible success, Parramatta obviously becoming a very significant CBD because it is the centre of Sydney. It's no longer really Western Sydney, it's the centre of Sydney. And we've got to, the trick to this will be keeping governments focused on the investments and the discipline around that. The thing that also gives me heart from the investment side of things is that I do think our superannuation funds will continue to look towards, good return investments, low risk. And if you've got regulated asset base, then that's even more appealing. So,
if you talk population and immigration there, one last question I'll throw to Adam, who's got some of the questions that the panelists have said in now and before. How can you, though, quite rightly use population to determine your spend of infrastructure, and tell the Sydney community that the northern beaches of Sydney won't have any more people? They don't want anyone else to come and live there, but they're going to get a beaches link when the A6, A3 congested corridor through the centre of Sydney isn't prioritised to others. Surely using government's own population projections now, which have changed since your first transport project was done, that we can say bye-bye to the Beaches Link and say hello to an A6, A3 road link, or a Campbelltown Rapid Bus. Or
you just made a big mistake, Chris, because the Princess Highway is the most important infrastructure in the state. So, you know.
Absolutely correct. How did I forget the people of the South Coast?
Yeah. I mean, look, to be honest with you, that either-or concept around infrastructure is a dangerous one, because the reality is that we should be using our infrastructure to drive jobs growth, given the vulnerabilities we now have and now face. It gets cash swirling around the state economy because people have money to spend.
Yep.
So that's the first point. Like if we don't have the cash flowing, then how can we even see any one of those 30% of small businesses that have potentially folded come back to life? And we've got an obvious challenge here. If we get a second wave of infections with COVID and small businesses have to close for a second time, this is why we've got to be very careful in the way in which we manage this. We could end up with a situation where businesses will be gone forever, and that structural unemployment will be very significant. So for me, I think staying the course with the vision, continuing to work with the private sector in terms of their confidence and their ability to invest. Value capture as a concept, I've always said this, it only, I think, can work in Australia, in an Australian context based on our population, with station precincts on a metro train. That's it. I think if you're going to look at value capture realistically, it'll only ever contribute at best 10% towards the capital cost of a project. But the only place where it can really work, given the very nature of the precinct developments, is around metro stations. That's it. That's my view, and I think the Jim Bettses of this world would probably back that in. So, I think that's important, because otherwise it just becomes a betterment tax, and I don't think any government in their right mind is going to go down a betterment levy approach, because it's failed before. And quite frankly, we've got a lot of people, particularly in Western Sydney, who have paid taxes all their lives and should be entitled to a taxpayer delivered and funded transport project to help them with their quality of life. And that's why the Northwest project has been, that's why there was no value capture applied with it, because, other than a bit of land banking from government, but, the reality is there wasn't a betterment levy applied there, because those generations of Australians living in Northwest should have had a train line put in a long time ago. I think the beauty with what we're dealing with, a blank sheet of paper around the Aerotropolis, is that gives us the capacity to use the infrastructure to grow, as opposed to putting the infrastructure in as a retrofit. And that's the exciting part there.